You're right, Rhys. How's it going?
Yeah, not too bad, Mr. Soup. Just enjoying my last drops of coffee.
Well, I've just enjoyed my last drops of beer. I just got back from the pub. It's about 9:30 here. What time is it there?
It's about 6:30, but I've been up since about 5:30, folks, because there's been a couple of outtakes between now and then. So yeah, we're doing all right.
That's very true. Okay. Anyway, nonetheless, we're here today just to have a bit of a chat about historical relativism. And in the same way that in anthropology there's the concept of cultural relativism. That is to say that, for example, in one culture, murder might in another culture be equated to a legitimate blood feud, that is almost legally sanctioned murder. You could make the same comparison with archaeology and physical history and heritage. I'm just wondering, why has this topic come up? Why is it that you're wanting to have a bit of chat about this?
Well, there was a story that came out in Melbourne recently about a very wealthy woman buying two heritage-listed properties on either side of it. They were 1850s mining cottages from memory. And basically she wanted to renovate them or do quite a lot of alterations to them to encompass them into her house. Now, under normal circumstances, that would never happen with state-protected sites. So I assume there's more to the story than what I know. But under that concern, and I'll put it up on Facebook, I got a few comments back about, well, if it's only an 1850s miner's cottage, why is it heritage protected in the first place? And I was a little confused by this question, because anything post circa 1900 and bit back, you would expect it in Australia to be protected in some form. Now, I say this because we have a system of protection which is not based on age, it's based on 5 different values. Now, these values are aesthetic, scientific, historic, social, and cultural. So if I've got, I'm pretty sure I've got all those right, but I was about to say, if I've got any wrong, I'm about to get slaughtered by my friends. But basically it's a values-based system where you have to look at its value in our society, modern society, its value historically and scientifically. Aesthetically is an interesting one because it basically talks about the how the site looks. Is it degraded from what it originally was? Does it need to have constant maintenance to make it look like we want it to? Things like that. So that's the problem, is that by comparison to a 1,000-year-old Saxon cathedral, it may not be that old, but it is just as important to the Australian people.
Okay. Well, I suppose and that is quite interesting, actually. That I suppose that relationship between age and historical value. I mean, for example, my favourite cathedral, not just because I went to university there, but my favourite cathedral in Britain is Durham Cathedral. It's a beautiful, beautiful building, and it's well worth a visit. But it's kind of interesting in so much as if I was to go, say, to the fringes of that city and take a look at buildings from the same period that you're talking about as being worthy of protection, we might come, or rather, the councils, the city councils, might come to very different conclusions as to what is worthwhile saving. And do you think that's sort of the heart of the matter here? It's just do you think it is purely simply a case of well, we've got more history than you? And because the reason why I say that actually is because I remember when I was working at York, the York Archaeological Trust, when I was working for one afternoon in the Viking Centre there, a lady came up to me from Melbourne, I seem to recall, not too far from you, and she was saying, "Oh, it's so wonderful to see actual history. And I was like, what do you mean? As a sort of slightly hippie-ish anthropologist, archaeologist I am. And she goes, you know, white history. And I was like, well, what do you mean? You know, you guys have history, have human history going back 60,000 years. What's going on there? And it fascinates me, and I suppose this is where it really is very relativistic, because in some ways you guys have a more continuous human history than we do in Britain.
The oldest continuing cultural history on Earth, as far as we understand it. The only ones that can be compared to the Australian Indigenous culture is, I think, tribes like the Bantu in Africa, which not as old, but they have very strong links to that ancient time period of hunter-gatherer. But it is an issue when people look at Indigenous archaeology and say, well, that's just a bunch of stones and bones, and that's nothing. Take a look at this. Take a look at this fantastic building here. At the moment for myself, take a look at this courthouse. Built in 1840, destroyed in 1860, destroyed in 1940, and they look at them in two completely different lights. Whereas as archaeologists, we don't have that luxury. It is the story of humanity that we're trying to tell, not the story of Imperial Britain and her production companies, as it were, and things like that. It's just, I think it has a lot to do with people trying to connect with what they see as their culture. In a lot of ways in modern times. That's why we have this disconnect between I suppose historical archaeology and Indigenous archaeology in Australia, whereas we don't see it as important in some, well, the man on the street doesn't see it as so important in some ways. But I mean, a good example of this is
actually that's one point where I find it fascinating. That, I mean, because people may well on the face of it criticise you and I, in so much as we're both white men, arguably white European men, and we're here talking about historical relativism. But I think an awful lot of people don't seem to understand that a good archaeologist is trained and is aware of actually of these multicultural issues. I mean, for example, recently there wasn't there a story on the Facebook page about a Canadian, was it a Canadian ship or something, where something like six.
I'm not quite sure why it's important to the Canadians, but I do understand that it's very important to them from a historical perspective, in the same way that Charlestown would be important to the United States. So what has happened is they've found this ship which has basically got $7 million or pounds, whatever they use in Canada. I'm sorry, my naivety on that one.
To be honest, it's horrible. I don't know either. It's terrible. Canadioids. I'm sure it's dollars. There was a young lady who was basically saying, in the United States, we have hundreds of sites which are degrading, that aren't being looked after, that, $7 million spread over, 20 sites would have done a lot more good for the heritage than spending it all on one particular ship. And I told her, just remember, you are from the United States. You're not from Canada to start off with, so you can't point out what is historically significant, what sites you want to save, and that it's not up to you, it's up to the Canadians. And the second thing is, as well, is that the amount of money that was put into it by not just the government. It's a government department that deals with those kind of things. Like, for example, where I'm from, we have state government departments, Heritage Victoria, which is separated into two different units for archaeology, terrestrial and historical. Both of these government departments have separate, they have one large budget, but then it's separated down into the two factions, as it were. Now, the interesting thing is that the maritime archaeologists, they
can save money over years and years and years to put into a single project, whereas terrestrial archaeology doesn't usually take that course. But it is really their choice. And the thing is that it's not just bureaucrats saying, well, this site's important, so we're going to do this one. Or I'm a terrestrial archaeologist, so I think all these land sites are important. Or I'm a maritime archaeologist, and I say this one's important. It's not done like that. It's done in a council form where you have 5 or 6 people who are heritage professionals, not just archaeologists, but people. One person who was actually my teacher at university, Anita Smith, worked for UNESCO. She was on the council for many years, periodically, and these decisions came up in a huge way on a world scale for her. So we were very lucky to have a person such as herself on a local state council to making these decisions. And I just think people don't give these guys enough credit. It is morally and mentally frustrating to have these arguments, sometimes for days, coming to a resolution as to how much protection a site should get, whether some funding should be put into to develop the site, or I suppose, protect the site. What it might cost $100,000 to put up, proper fencing around the site, for example, so people can't get onto it, things like that. And they have to think very hard about it because they have a set budget. But one of the points that I made is that I'm not sure about the United States, but I know Australia, New Zealand, and the UK and many other European countries have the National Trust. Mm-hmm. And it's the National Trust's job, as it were, to put money into existing buildings, to basically take care of them. They're caretakers. And I don't know if the United States has that. I assume that they do, maybe on state, maybe on federal level. But I also said in this case that it is good that we have this, because we have this private organisation, or private/public organisation, and then we have the government department. So it's not just all made by certain individuals within government, faceless men, as it were. It's done in a way that if people think it's important, then it's important. Mm-hmm. That's all you need in Australia, for people to think it's important.
Well, I suppose that coming back to that raw issue of historical relativism, that idea of what is important is really the core of it. For example, most prehistoric sites in Britain would not be seen as important by most people in Britain. They would see them as, even if it's the most impressive shell midden in the world, if it hasn't got standing stones, it's not worthwhile taking a photo of. You can't visit it with your family. There's no point in going there. And I suppose it's that element of actually deconstructing this argument, in so much as that you have, for example, the historical consideration, you have the cultural consideration, you have the legitimate academic value of a site, and then also you do, of course, you have the, I don't know, for want of a better word, the visitability of a site. Where all of this plays into whether or not it's going to get funding and it's going to be looked after in the medium to long term. No one is going to turn around and say that Stonehenge isn't worthwhile looking after. But if you took a site of similar size, shape, and period, and from another part of the UK, which isn't quite so obvious above ground, it's not going to get looked after. And obviously I suppose that's relativism within a country. But I can't help but think that the same happens, for example, in Australia, going back to that lady that I talked to in Jorvik, when sites that I suppose, for want of a better word, they're not European, or rather they're not white, as she said. It's an uncomfortable idea, and I suppose the question is, to what extent are we responsible as archaeologists and anthropologists for actually enforcing our theory of relativism on the rest of our own society? Should we actually be saying to people, no, these sites are equally valid. You can't say that this one is more impressive, even though it's a castle, than this shell midden over here. I don't know. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting. It is because as an archaeologist, you're telling the story of humanity. I think I might have said that before, but it's it's you cannot separate one side from another in that respect. Some sites are what we colloquially call more sexy than others, but as for their importance,
a bit like you're more sexy than me.
Oh, I don't want to go there. But,
Go on.
Yeah, it's just basically we don't separate on the basis of necessarily just aesthetics, like you're saying, the visual. Archaeology isn't just saved so people can come and look at it. It is saved because it's important to somebody. I mean, it's the same way why someone takes their pictures. A lot of people now have their pictures all digitally up on computers and things like that. They don't have photo albums anymore. So because a photo album is outdated, because it's not relevant anymore, it doesn't make it not important. No, not at all. The wealth of information that we can gain from those pictures is invaluable in the same sense as the ones that are digital now. So it's like saying, culturally, Indigenous sites, they were lithic based in a lot of ways. They're tools, things like that. So it takes a lot more skill, I think, to look at sites like that and to tell a meaningful story of the hunter-gatherers and the way they survive things like climate change. Because a lot of people don't associate, for example, the Ice Age, I suppose, or the Younger Dryas, as we call it, with Indigenous Australians. But the thing is that in Australia around that time, huge climate change, which changes your food patterns, which changes what you can eat and how you hunt it and how you eat it. And these people adapted. These people adapted to their situation perfectly. And we're seeing it in today, the wealth of knowledge that was lost because of the cultural disconnection when Europeans came in. How connected they were to their land. And even modern day scientists are using examples of Australian Indigenous methods of agriculture to employ in today's society. So that's, that's only one example.
So
do that.
So in that sense, you would say that actually it is sort of our responsibility to try and to point out the value of these not so obvious. You don't have monuments, you don't have castles or cathedrals or cities or even writing, but these cultures, these cultural achievements are very valid. It's interesting really, because at the moment in the UK, there's been a huge shift in the national curriculum. So basically there's a big change in what especially primary school children, so the first few years of school are having to learn, and we're having to look at prehistory, and it is a nightmare, an absolute nightmare, actually trying to communicate to people, to teachers who've had decades of the Romans were here and the Romans gave us everything that we value. The Romans. It's really hard actually to get beyond that. I mean, never mind looking at Saxons and Vikings, going backwards, through the Iron Age, through the Bronze Age, through the different Stone Ages. It's really hard to communicate the value of those societies. And I suppose so I went off on a slight tangent there, but actually bringing it back to the for example to the ship or to your mining cottages in Australia, is that essentially the core of it? Do you think the core of this situation is that actually every period has a story, and it's not our duty to enforce the value of these stories on other people, but rather to highlight them and to make sure that they're not negated or dismissed, maybe.
Well, yeah, and this is the thing, is that unfortunately the model of archaeology that we pertain to is basically that we have to fight each other for funding a lot of the time. We have to say why our side is more important than anyone else's. Yeah, it's a kind of a dichotic situation where we're saying every side is important as every other side, but my side's better. and it really is like that for professors who are fighting and saying, well, a professor of Roman archaeology is fighting a professor of, Viking archaeology for funding. You know, and they've got to.
Or frankly, actually, professors of different periods in the Roman Empire. You know, I mean, early and late in Britain. You know, you'll get people going, "Oh no, this is much more important." Yeah.
That's the point. Is they're saying it's much more important. Which, I mean, how can we tell the public they shouldn't think like that when we can't even do it half the time? You know, it's an interesting thought, and I personally think that it should be probably done in a different way. That more like a rotational system of funding rather than best project wins. I think best project.
This week we are going to be funding only Mesolithic sites. No. I don't. What? You found Shakespeare's most famous manuscript? No. Only Mesolithic sites. No. I know what you mean. Yeah. No. I'm sorry. I'm being facetious. No. You're right. You're right. No, maybe there just needs to be that, and perhaps actually part of the problem is that obviously funding is often public and also government driven, and public and government driven often leads to essentially politically savvy funding, which is unfortunate.
This is the history of the Labour Party.
Well, before we get into politics, we have to draw this conversation to a close. But I suppose actually that does tie in actually back in with that Canadian ship and that element of actually that has been deemed it has been deemed valuable, like it or not. Whoever disagrees with it has been deemed valuable, and maybe that's. I don't know, maybe that's where we're at the moment in the history of our profession. You know, what is deemed valuable and what is deemed significant is dug. Perhaps. Yeah. Okay.
That's it. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to go back to bed very shortly. So, I'll say my goodbyes, Mr. Sir.
Actually, I'm going to go to bed shortly. Oh, love it. Right, anyway, thanks so much for getting up early, and next time we'll have to try and get me up early so that you have a chance to have a drink.
Don't want to scare the viewers.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's true, actually. I'm quite scary in the first instance. All right. Anyway, cheers, and have a good day. Ta-ra. Bye. Yeah.